So let's face it. On that unforgettable, history-altering night of November 8th, 2016, nobody was quite sure what to expect following the shock-inducing election of Donald J. Trump to the most powerful position in the world. Would this brash, bombastic political novice actually be prepared to make myriad consequential decisions affecting the lives of over 300 million Americans and billions more around the world? Well, there were almost as many opinions of what a Trump presidency would look like as there were observers. There were those who were convinced he would do just what he promised. Some who thought his promises were designed simply to win the election. Others who believed he would become just another mouthpiece for the status quo, and many, of course, who saw his election as a sure sign of Armageddon on the horizon, including the hysterical left and establishment media and most members of the permanent Washington bureaucracy. The most broadly appealing element of Trump, the candidate, was that he was independently wealthy and self-financed, thus representing something unique in presidential politics, a man who owed nothing to moneyed interests. But the unfortunate corollary to that was that nobody owed Trump anything either. Unlike Ronald Reagan, the last revolutionary president who marched into D.C. with a legion of diehard supporters, Trump entered the confines of the swamp almost alone, elected mostly by the powerless. And that made for uniquely tough sledding from the moment he arrived in the nation's capital, with swamp lifers and elite media openly or covertly seeking to end his presidency by whatever means would present themselves. We were forced at first to consider the question of whether Trump could even survive in a climate that was so openly hostile to his arrival. But he has soldiered on and defied countless predictions of his imminent demise on the basis of Russiagate or the Comey firing or Stormy Daniels and on and on. Everything, it seems, is a scandal if Trump is involved. Out of the gate, the president's own party was hardly much help. Most D.C. Republicans had been fearful or even repulsed by the thought of this acid-tongued outsider invading their turf, intent on rocking their world. The debate among dyed-in-the-wool conservatives centered around whether Trump was actually even conservative. Outspoken anti-Trumpers within both the GOP and conservative policy establishment were certain that he was not a conservative. Thus, the never-Trumpers must have been shocked and silenced by a study from the largest conservative organization in the world, the Heritage Foundation, which concluded that Trump had achieved more conservative objectives than the gold standard Ronald Reagan in his first 12 months of their respective presidencies, and had accomplished almost two-thirds, 64% to be precise, of his and their entire conservative agenda in his first year in the Oval Office. Now, of course, the argument could be made that Trump accomplished at least half of his objectives simply by winning the election and denying Hillary Clinton the opportunity to build on the leftist legacy of President Barack Obama. And it is worthy of note that Reagan came to office with Democrats in control of both the House and Senate, while Trump was gifted with GOP control of both chambers for his first 2 years. Trump was also blessed with twin opportunities to move the Supreme Court in a constitutionalist direction. He delivered Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh with virtually unanimous support from the GOP and conservatives. And he may yet get the rare opportunity to seal the direction of the High Court for years to come with a third pick. Almost as important but overlooked is the assembly line of new lower court judges Trump has fast-tracked to the Senate for confirmation, 85 to date. The judiciary will certainly be at the heart of this president's legacy, no matter what happens from this time forward. From the start, Trump sent forth the word that after years of painfully slow recovery from the Great Recession, America was once again open for business. The America First climate he's engendered, on top of the game-changing tax reform bill and the most aggressive deregulatory scheme in American history, have combined to produce a roaring economy, record low unemployment across the board, and soaring consumer and business confidence. Trump has launched offensive on multiple fronts to reverse years of neglect and willful blindness and incompetence in Washington. While he's constantly accused of being uninformed and short-sighted, Trump's boldest moves may be the ones which require a long view. Let me explain what I mean. From immigration to China to the broader issue of trade, Trump accepts short-term pain for long-term gain. He's willing to absorb countless body blows and charges of racism on the partial government shutdown for the sake of attacking the long, intractable third-rail issue of illegal immigration. He accepts widespread criticism on tariffs today to advance the long-term goal of more equitable agreements with multiple trade partners tomorrow. He's willing to take on a barrage of incoming fire for calling out NATO partners to pay their fair share. He rejected conventional wisdom and finally fulfilled a promise made by his predecessors to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. He withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal, despite worldwide criticism, because he's convinced that those agreements will not serve America's long-term interests. His policies are consistently dictated by common sense, undiluted by political correctness, and the way things had always been done. And the driving force behind all of it, and this is important, is Trump's willingness to leverage the basic truth that the countries of the world need America more than America needs them. Now, his cabinet, it was dubbed one of the most conservative in American history, and it's included hits and misses as in most administrations. Mike Pompeo has been in sync with Trump's Andrew Jackson-like foreign policy after taking over as Secretary of State from Rex Tillerson, who never seemed to understand this president. Similarly, Chief Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow is consistently on the same page with Trump as successor to Gary Cohn, who was not in tune with the president on numerous issues. Betsy DeVos, controversial choice for Education Secretary, has done yeoman's work in the area of free speech in academia. Lower-profile members of the cabinet have quietly gone about the work of sweeping change to a stultified bureaucracy. On the other hand, Jeff Sessions was widely viewed as a feckless attorney general after recusing himself from the Robert Mueller special counsel investigation, though William Barr may well be a good fit to replace him. We'll talk about that more later in the show. Tom Price, seemingly an ideal selection to oversee health care reform at Health and Human Services, HHS, and Scott Pruitt, widely acclaimed among conservatives as Trump's initial head of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, were forced to resign amid disturbing reports about padding their expense accounts. Now, slowly but surely, it's clear that Trump is figuring out the few who are truly with him and the many who are not. He's learned about the few who can get things done and the many who cannot. His learning curve was undeniably sharp at the outset, but it's flattened considerably over 24 months. And just think of how much more Trump might have accomplished if he was not weighed down from the get-go by a federal law enforcement establishment bent on taking him down, and elite media which went from denying their hysterical anti-Trump bias to admitting it to wearing it as a badge of honor. Deep state operatives acted with impunity against Trump's nascent and disorganized administration from the start. Basic standards of journalism were discarded as quickly as Trump's rejection of so-called normal presidential behavior. The Mueller investigation carries into a 22nd month, still desperately in search of any smoking gun which can bring this president down with impeachable offenses. Trump is, famously, his own worst enemy at times, no doubt, but the people who support his policies while criticizing his outsized and often reckless public presence have by now come to understand that you can't have one without the other. The much anticipated pivot of Trump to a more traditional president is not in the cards. He's not going to change. In 2016, the voters were willing to accept his shortcomings because of Trump's audacious promises. The question for 2020 is whether the nation is willing again to accept the downside of Trump's hard edges in exchange for the upside of not his promises this time, but his actual accomplishments. Most assessments of a president, or any politician for that matter, begin with a verdict on whether he's actually delivered on his promises. And contrary to how he was written off by the elite media as simply a showman, Trump has unleashed a remarkably bold and broad and deep agenda of fundamental sweeping reforms, just as he promised he would. With the exception of his border wall, for which he's willing to risk his political career, and a repeal of Obamacare, which lost by one vote in the Senate, Trump has either achieved or put into motion almost everything he promised in a daring campaign platform supported by 62 million Americans. Trump has gone beyond the talk and walked the walk, proving himself every bit the disruptor he claimed to be. In first surviving, then thriving in open defiance of odds heavily stacked against him, the same thing that Reagan said about his record over 8 years as president during his farewell speech to the nation 30 years ago could well be restated about Trump's first 2 years. Not bad. Not bad at all. So while Trump has survived and thrived, the same cannot be said of the Brexit rebellion, which was a foreshadowing of Trump's election. We'll discuss another humiliating defeat for Brexit and British Prime Minister Theresa May when we return.